good to be back. I haven't been to a Fenders event in like over 6 months because we had a little boy. This is Louis, and he's pretty cute. And he has also meant that I've had no ability to leave the house for most of the last 6 months. But I'm here tonight, and I get to talk about the other 6 billion. The web, I'll just go back. The web is supposed to be a pretty inclusive environment. The idea is it should be somewhere where we can reach out beyond people in our immediate location. We can hit people in different contexts, whether they're on their phone, whether they're walking, whether they're at work, whether they're at home. We can talk to people on the other side of the world. We can reach out to people who have different needs than us, people who use screen readers, people who have motor disabilities. The web should be inclusive. I'm going to talk about how we can expand our audience to include another 6 billion people. Now, of course, that is clearly a bit of hyperbole, some alternative facts, if you will, because there's only 4,383,810,342 people connected to the internet. Apparently. I don't know if that's still current as of right now. But the web, is used by a whole different we try to make it as inclusive as possible. And this is a big part of our craft as web developers. We really sweat the details on making sure everyone's included. So we love to habitually check whether the feature we want is supported in all of the browsers and check the percentage uses of those browsers. We love to look at responsive design, and we built entire development environments to help us build for different form factors so that our work is going to be accessible in different things. This is a really cool thing that Seek built, by the way. I can't remember what it's called. Playroom. Look it up on GitHub if you're interested. We love to talk about accessibility and screen readers and keyboard accessibility and how we can make things available to people whose needs are different than ours. Or whose preferences are different to ours. If they like their fonts big, we should be able to cater for that. And as web developers, we love to think about all of this. And it makes the web really complicated. All of these competing concerns might lead to a realization. It's just really hard to make it work for everyone. And you can never make it look the same on everyone else's, but that's a good thing because we're including more people. The web is inclusive, and I would say it's more inclusive than we realize. When I looked at this event tonight, originally there was 111 Fenders who said they were planning on coming. I think there's less than that who are here as of right now. But if that was the case, and we were starting to think about who speaks which languages, in this room, if this was a global representative, an even representation of who people on the planet and what languages they speak, only 5 people would be native English speakers in this room. Probably less because the room's less full than I was expecting. And only 11 would be fluent with English as a second language, which is pretty tiny. Wikipedia has a pretty cool list of first languages and second languages and how many people on the earth speak them. And English is the 3rd most common. So Mandarin and its different forms have almost 1 billion native speakers, and Spanish is the next most common primary language. English comes in 3rd. When you look at second languages, English begins to step up there, and so it's got one of the largest totals there. One of the interesting things here is Arabic is way bigger than I realized, with 273 million secondary speakers, and that's important because their language is really different and runs in a different direction. So who here has done some kind of multilingual support on the website or in an app? Yeah, a few people? Okay, that's a good portion of the room. Who here is like, I never have to do that, my audience is just Australian? Yeah, some people, yeah. I was looking at this and I was like, what are some of the most Australian things that are out there, and are they just in English? Because we're a country with only one official language. This is the ATO. They have not the entire website translated, but they have information available in a bunch of different languages. Same for the Department of Human Services. So governments, if you're working in government, there's a good chance you're going to have to do this kind of stuff. I work for an Australian startup. We have offices in different countries, but all of our staff are English speaking, and we only sell to English speaking people. And yet even our small company has to support 46, I think, different languages, because a bunch of our clients are multinationals who their staff need to be able to access our platform in a bunch of different languages. And as I've started learning more about this, I began to realize how important it is and how small-minded it is to say we're just going to do English only. So at our company, 52% of Culture Amp accounts have a user using a language other than English. So even though we only sell in English, we only have a sales team in English, we only have support teams in English, over half of our customers, over half of the companies that use us, have at least someone who is multilingual. And those accounts are the important ones. They're the ones that are bringing in almost 3/4 of our annual revenue. So learning to translate can be a really good thing for your business, just saying. You might go, we definitely, this screenshot is from last week, it looks pretty dated now. You might go, we definitely only have English content, but there might be people who come to your site and they go, I would like to read this in my other language. And Chrome and Edge, through an extension for Edge, both support translating whatever you're looking at in your browser. So even though you're building with only English in mind, other people might be reading your content in a different language. And the way you design your page and the way you make it flow is all important. And that's a screenshot of the translator extension for Edge. Yeah. And you might go, I don't care. I don't want people doing weird stuff to my website. Here's something I quoted from a Fenders meetup last year from Julie at the back of the room. If someone wants to do something weird to your website, let them. And if somebody wants to translate your website, even though you don't offer translations, you should do what you can to make your site accessible to them, because maybe they're not as comfortable with English as you are. So what do we actually have at our disposal to help make this better? Let's start with the lang attribute. Who's ever added a lang attribute to their HTML? Yes? Who has only added it at the top and you said HTML lang equals n? Yeah, that's pretty much it. That's pretty good even in and of itself, because that gives extra information to things like those translating tools in the browser that wouldn't be there if you didn't provide it. The language attribute on its own seems to, does it make any difference to the page? Not really, but it gives extra metadata that these other tools can begin to use. Another example of where this comes in handy is if you use it on an input or a text area, something like that. You can actually specify the language, and some browsers, I think Safari and Firefox do this, but Chrome doesn't. They will actually respect the language you choose and give you a spell checker in that language if you've got it installed. So here I had a CodePen where the top text area is English Australia, the bottom one is English US, and I've said I didn't realize how you spell realize in Australia, and I didn't realize how you spell realize in the US. And it's detected that the locale is different, so it should be done differently. So if you have user-entered content and you want your users to be doing in a particular locale, this is an attribute you should be paying attention to. If you want your users to be able to do it in any locale or in their preferred locale, again, it's something you can be paying attention to. And even if the rest of your page isn't translated, you could at least let them set their preferred language for their content so that the spell checker does what they expect by default. So one of the things that when I was reading about this, it suggested that doing this might have an impact on screen readers. The voiceover in macOS doesn't use this attribute for anything, as far as I can tell. So I tried to do a recording of it, but I couldn't figure out how to record the actual sounds. Yeah, it's hard, okay. But it just read everything in an Australian accent and tried to pronounce French or Italian words like an Australian from the bush that had never met someone who didn't come from their hometown. And so it just kind of stumbled over it and it didn't use it. I'm not sure if other screen readers, VoiceOver for Mac isn't as I know a lot of people prefer JAWS and some of the other screen readers. But anyway, as far as I can tell, the Mac one doesn't actually use that, but in theory, other ones might. But one thing you can do once you set this language attribute is you can begin to use it in your CSS. And a good example of this, well, a terrible example, is just showing the correct word. So you can actually use this to detect different languages. And one thing worth noting, that first CSS rule, I don't know if you can see that, it says lang n, and there's no language equals exactly just en. All of them are en dash something. But the CSS is smart enough to know that's English and it applies to any of the English variants. And so you can begin to do that. Or you can target more specifically a single locale or any other one. So that is one example you can use. That seems pretty useless, but something you can use it for, and this actually ties into what Mandy was talking about fonts and subsets of fonts and fonts that cover all the different character sets. If I used a font like Ideal Sans, this is our company's brand font, once you start to translate stuff, you realize our brand font has awful multilingual support and only supports quite a small character set. And so your stuff begins to fall back to a default font. And so what you can do is actually target based on the language, you can get it to load a different font. Now you could just do fallbacks and have enough fallbacks that there is a sensible font like Source Sans or Helvetica or something that supports most things. But by targeting it, it allows you to load specific fonts for that locale. And so as an example, the BBC, anytime you want an example of a website with good accessibility and good multilingual support, the BBC has excellent stuff. And they have content available in all of these languages. And using Firefox's developer tools, looking at the fonts used, you can see how many different languages, and that was about half of the scroll area. Almost every font is loading a custom language. And you wouldn't want to specify all of them in one CSS rule because you wouldn't want to load all of those fonts. But you can specify them so that if some of these scripts show up on your page, then it loads the correct font for that text. So that's the lang attribute. The other main one that you will find yourself using if you get into this is the dir, the direction attribute. And Anton touched on this just before. So yes, he did steal my thunder. But I'm going to go into it in a little bit more detail. And I won't go into the Unicode BiDi algorithm, which is like a complete mind-blown experience trying to read and understand how this works. But here we have a H1 that is normal, so left to right, and it's in English, and then a H1 that's the same text in English, but we've forced the direction to go the wrong way around. We've got Arabic, but it's not saying what direction it goes, and then we've got Arabic with it saying right to left, which is the correct direction for Arabic text. And so you might want to think about which way is this going to go? Before I bring it up, do you think that specifying right to left will cause all of the text to flip backwards, or will it cause each word to flip backwards? What's it going to do? Let's have a look. So left to right English, that comes through correctly. Right to left with English, it does this bizarre thing where the punctuation is on the wrong side, but otherwise the browser was smart enough to figure out the rest of it makes sense. Arabic, if you have this without specifying the direction, you'll notice the full stop is over on the right, but Arabic reads from the right to the left. So they would start reading the sentence here, and they would move this way, but the full stop is on the wrong side. So this looks as wrong to an Arabic reader as this does to an English reader. So if you don't specify it, it's readable, but just weird. And so you want to try and get it right. Whereas with Arabic, if you do specify the direction, it works. Hooray. What's interesting is looking at the arrows. You might think that the arrows just run in one direction. This is left to right, this one's right to left to right, right to left. But it's actually a little bit more complex. So English goes all the way across there. This one starts with a direction going right to left, or it starts with a right to left. It's weird. The full stop is running in a different direction than the rest of it. When you get here, it's more obvious what's going on. So Arabic starts over here, and they read, and then they get to something which runs some numbers and they use the same number system as us. In fact, our numbers are called Arabic numerals. And so that then runs left to right, and then we flip back again, and then another number, so then we flip. And so the direction is continuously changing. And for the most part, browsers are smart enough to figure that out. So editors, not so much. Here's a screenshot of me just pressing down right in my editor. Just holding down right, nothing else. And then I switch to holding down left with shift to try and select. So whenever you try to edit stuff that's like this, it drives your mind insane. It's pretty crazy. It kind of reminds me as well, because we've just come out of an election, of this Simpsons quote. But tonight I say we must move forward, not backward. We must move upward, not forward. And always twirling, twirling, twirling towards freedom. I don't know if any Simpsons fans are here, but that is a lot like our current political dialogue. If these directions aren't satisfying to you, if you look at it and it starts to go wrong, there are some HTML attributes. I've almost never had to use these, but for completeness, I've included them. This example comes from NDM, Mozilla's development docs. Basically, BDI treats a fragment as independent from the direction of its parents. And so what we're doing here is we're wrapping the name and saying this name is user-generated content, or this name could be in English, it could be in Arabic, it could be in French. We don't know, so treat this name separate. And so with that, it mostly works. The third example, the number 3, they've just used a span instead of the BDI. And you'll notice it's broken, like 3 something something place. Like it's managed to mash it up because, I don't know why, just because it's weird. And so this is something where you might, if this begins to happen in your text, you might want to consider using BDI to wrap things. There is also BDO, which overrides the direction, despite what the contents are. So this is normally like what I showed you before, when you force a direction, but it's the wrong one. You just kind of like, it mostly gets it right, but then there's some punctuation that's weird. If you use the bidirectional override element, it just forces everything to go backwards. And so that actually says BDO overrides the, like, it's all backwards. When are you ever going to use that? Almost never. The one time is if you are quoting letters in a, like if you're trying to teach someone Hebrew or teach someone another language, you might want to force it to not treat those as a segment, not treat those as like a whole fragment of text, but treat them as individual letters. And so here, the contents of these 2 paragraphs is exactly the same, but the order of the letters is different because the Unicode algorithm looks at those two Hebrew characters and it guesses that's a block of Hebrew text, and it switches the direction for those 2 letters when we didn't want it to. So that's the one time you'd have to use that. I have never used that tag in my life other than for a CodePen to figure out what it does. Now, one of the things, when we start switching this, you might also want to think about switching the layout. Again, if we look at BBC, this is their Portuguese Brazilian version of their website, where their menus and everything sit on the left and it kind of flows that way. It's nice, though not entirely required, but it is nice to support it when you're doing a right-to-left language to flip your layout. And if you've got directional elements where you have arrows that mean next or previous, you want to have them pointing in the direction that their text is flowing, because that makes more sense. So if you normally have a next button at the bottom right of your modal, because right means going forward, then when you're running in right to left, you want that to be sitting on the other side. So when I had a look at this event earlier today on the Meetup site, I wanted to see what happens when you go and you forcibly flip the direction and just see what breaks. And so to do this, you can just set the direction at the top of the body and have a look at what's happening. Even without translating, you can see how much of the layout flips. And when you do this, stuff goes weird really quickly if you haven't been planning for it. Like a whole bunch of things are like, why are those dates overlapping? Where did the gaps between the buttons go? Why is the logo, like the Meetup logo, in the middle when it used to be like separated on the other side from those links? And you start looking into it, and I kind of opened my DevTools and had a look, and see that little 22nd of May square? It's got a margin left on it. Now, a margin left means that it's a negative margin left, so it's asking it to sit outside of the main content area to the left of it. But once we flip our display, this is now on the right, and so giving it a margin left is just moving it into the content area, and we're beginning to overlap with everything that's there. Now, if we hadn't have used margins, but we had have used Flexbox, we would have had built-in right-to-left support. So Anton touched on Grid before. Flexbox and Grid both were built to support this out of the box. So really simple example, excuse my super ugly like modal buttons, straight from Bootstrap with an ugly grey background. But if we're used to having stuff, as I said before, with your modal buttons kind of sitting on the right and you want to flip them, this is what the kind of justify content when you say flex start or flex end, this is what that means. Who's actually gone to learn Flexbox or Grid and just been like, why didn't they just use left or right? This is so confusing. Yeah, I didn't get it for the first like 2 or 3 years of using Flexbox until I had to do this project and learn this. The reason they did it is because it makes everything so much easier. So as you can see here, I've got the exact same markup on the left, other than I'm setting a direction of right to left, and all of a sudden it's flipped, and it's logically the way that somebody who reads in a right to left script would expect it to be. So flex start for us means left, and flex end for them might mean right, but in a right to left language, that's flipped around. And so once you start doing this, it becomes much easier to think in start and finish, and you want to use it all the time. Grid is the same. I'm not going to go into it, so I'm glad Anton did. But you can have a grid, and when you change nothing but the direction, everything flips around, which is good. And so when we went to do our application, some of our more modern pages, which are using Flexbox and which are fairly simple, these ones flipped around really easily because the whole thing was built with Flexbox. When we went to some more legacy parts of our site and flipped stuff, things got weird. And like our menu, the space where the menu could be, the space was still there, but then the menu was sitting over the top of half the content on the other side. And so we had to go through and just start finding all the things where things had gone wrong. We had things that were just not aligned correctly. The button at the bottom with all rating questions, that arrow was pointing the wrong way. Lots of small things. And so what we did was we built some Sass mix-ins, which are similar to, in the same way you've got with Flexbox or Grid, you have flex start, flex end. We wanted margin start and margin end, and we wanted align start and align end. So we started building stuff like that. And the way you do that is you just set text align to left by default, but then if it's in a right to left element or it's a child of a right to left element, then it flips the text direction, which is easy. Did the same for margin. And then before you know it, we start being able to flip our whole page pretty effectively. Please ignore the fact half the stuff on this page isn't translated. Most of it is now, but I took these screenshots a while ago. So how do you actually translate stuff? There's lots of ways to do it. There's lots of providers online. We are about to switch to a super expensive one called Smartling, but they do stuff like having automatic translation proxying, so they can just take your website and kind of translate it with a machine, then a human, and give someone the stuff immediately, and with the quality improving once the human gets to it. But they're super expensive. Anyway, we're with them. There's lots of other ones. If you're looking for an open source option, Mozilla's got a project called Pontoon, which is a full translation management software, and they've got a Docker image, so you can spin this up and run it for your team. And it can integrate with your GitHub repos and whatever else you're doing. So that's another option if you're looking for something where you can use in-house translators or use a local translator rather than using an internet service. In terms of like how to actually do it, some people, and we still do this actually at work, but it's not my preferred approach, is they do the translations on the back end and they pass it down to the front end. That's really common if you started with a back-end heavy system and have introduced more JavaScript over the years. But a better way to do it is there's Webpack plugins like the Webpack internationalization plugin, where it gives you a magic function, which is 2 underscores, and any text you wrap in a function with 2 underscores, it treats as a translatable string, and it will pull that out into your English JSON file, which you then ask to get translated. You get it translated into German. And what Webpack does is then it takes all those files and it generates 2 bundles. You have a JavaScript bundle that has your English words and a JavaScript bundle that has your German words, and you just load the one that the user needs. So that's there. There was some other stuff that I wanted to share, and then because of the baby, our whole family was sick with the flu last week and I didn't get time to prepare it. But I do have one final tip, and that is for language selectors. This was what our language selector used to look like. Other than the fact that the flags look horrible and that it's not using any of our design system stuff, we ran into this issue where we tried to include users by having their language, and then we got this support ticket come through. We're about to launch our global engagement survey and have it in 7 different languages. When getting the survey tested in Vietnamese, I was informed that the appearance of the Vietnamese flag was considered offensive to many of our employees who are refugees from Vietnam. Is it possible to replace the flag with another symbol or just use the word Vietnam? And so we did that. And it's amazing how many issues of offending people you resolve by not using flags for your locale pickers. Don't do it. It's a trap. Thank you. All right.